folks, TJ here. What's this cast number 4 for the Crash radio station? Sorry I'm a bit late. Well, not late, I just haven't been able to make any videos for my YouTube channel or radio spots for the Crash radio because I've been without internet for an extended period of time. If you've been following my channel, last year we had a doozy of a winter storm that was kind of like an apocalyptic storm up here because it wiped out so many drought-stricken trees with the heavy snow we had, trees falling on what do you call them? Telephone poles. There you go. Whew. I had a bad allergy night last night, and I'm not feeling the greatest today, so bear with me, because I didn't sleep much. My eye is stinging like a Dickens as normal. But I need to get this in because my wife's out walking the dog, taking our corgi to work because all of her coworkers wanted to check him out. See how he's aging well. He's only a little over a year old now. Where was I? I don't know where I'm also making a video too, so this will pop on my YouTube channel the Saturday after this airs. So again, yeah, last year we had a bad storm, and during that we were out without power for 5 days, and without internet for about the same, I think about a week or so. This year, a similar story. Fortunately, knock on, you probably hear that on the radio, watching me on my video now, if you watch it later, that we only lost, we had some brownouts during the time, but we did lose internet for 2 weeks this time. And so I had to scramble, and I'm on T-Mobile phone. Up here in the lower mountains of California, none of the 3 carriers come in at all. So when the internet goes out, we're pretty much dead. The best our T-Mobile phone could do, if I wrap tinfoil around my head, and if you're listening to the radio, I'm circulating around my head right now with aluminum foil, making a little antenna. Going upstairs and pointing it out a particular window, we could maybe do a text. That's about it. So what I did this last Friday, because I need to get work done for work, because I do work from home, I actually switched to Verizon. I used to have them before, and I was going off of memory. They are twice the price, but I think I could just barely do a little bit of data very slowly. So I could do text, I could do a call, and if I put my phone next to a WeBoost antenna that I also have up on the side of the house, I could do very slow data, which is good enough for basic web browsing, which is, I need to access web pages for work, and can't do upload of videos though. So I couldn't do any uploading of anything. I'd have to go to town, and which I did once. I uploaded 3 videos while I was in town and spaced them out. People were going, "Oh, you're back online." No, I'm not back online. I uploaded videos tethered to my phone from town where I could actually get a somewhat okay upload speed. Because upload, even with Verizon, doesn't work. Download, I think I was maybe doing someplace between 100K and 600K download, if lucky. And sporadic, it would come in and go out periodically. Upload is non-existent. So I couldn't even upload barely, nothing. No videos, no audio, nothing like that. So I had to apologize to Sonic, Crash Radio Sonic, Dave Sonic, that unfortunately I couldn't do any radio spots because I have no way to upload it. I could have made one and went to town, but it was a lot different because I have to put it on my Gmail account for him to grab. It's different than YouTube. So I was ready for slapping up 3 videos I'd already done on YouTube. The radio spots I didn't. So I apologize for being away a little bit. But my internet did kind of, I'm knocking on wood again, come back yesterday. Yesterday. And out of the blue, I wasn't expecting it for another several weeks. Magically, it arrived. Because I got an email from the place saying drastic damages from the new storm that just came through. So by the way, if you don't follow California weather, and probably most of the people listening are overseas, there's feet of snow. Snow that is as tall as rooftops, 17 feet. Not where I live, but up in higher parts of the county. I'm up in the mountains, so many feet of snow. Here, even, we had multiple snowstorms, and they were only, 2, 4, 5 inches, but then ice would settle underneath it, so ice and people driving and crashing and trees falling and wiping out lines devastated the internet infrastructure that was here. So this time, it took them 2 weeks to fix and get me up, but there's still thousands of people without it. So maybe I was just lucky in being first in the chain because I'm lower down in the foothills of getting it fixed. So while I have internet, in case it goes out again, I'm going to make a radio spot. I'm yapping a lot, not telling you much, but that's why I've been away. So my thought, as I was without power on that Sunday, I've been reading a lot of Atari magazines. Now, I know Crash is more Sinclair, mostly Sinclair, all Sinclair oriented, but I will envelope back into Sinclair because as I was reading a magazine called Atari Computing, it ran from 96 to 2000, just as the Millennium Falcon came. Millennia 2000. And then they went out of business. It was kind of the last hurrah. Atari Computing formed after many Atari magazines, and I'm about to sneeze. Can I blow my nose? This is a radio show, so hold on a second. This should be interesting. I'm gonna go blow my nose. You can just listen to dead air, and then maybe you'll hear me blow my nose in the background. Hold on a second. Oh, that feels so good. When you get older, just blowing your nose and having good bodily movements is a wonderful thing. But like I said, my allergies are really bad right now. Oh, where was I? I was someplace. Internet. So I was reading Atari Computing magazine. And like I said, it was the last hurrah. A whole bunch of magazines, Atari related, basically were going out that same year or just went out. And these group of guys that were enthusiasts got together and made a magazine. And they eventually went 3.5 years, I guess, which was pretty cool. But during that time, there was a lot of ups and downs. The down was Atari went out of business. Basically, they said we can't do the computer world anymore, and our Jaguar is just not doing what we needed to do. And they were just that same year, 96, basically saying, that's it, we're gone. Sold and merged with JTS, and JTS eventually sold Atari to Hasbro. That was a quick nutshell. So as I was reading these magazines, and I went through all 16 issues, reading pretty well, not page for page, but story for story that I thought of interest. I was reading about it, so I had my down like, oh dang, I love Atari, they went out of business. And then I'm sure a lot of you listeners were in the same boat with Amiga, Commodore, basically, oh, they're going out of business. Apple almost went out of business the end of 90, if you really think about it. It was a lot of downs for some of the smaller platforms. We're not going to call Apple a smaller platform, though, because although they about went out of business, they didn't, and now they're the biggest business in the world. They lucked out, but with some skill, too. But anyway, Atari, so basically I was reading these magazines going, oh man, Atari went out of business. Well, I knew it already, but I was sad. And then I started, well, we're the fans of Atari. We're going to keep this going. So I was reading in the magazine and enjoying, oh, look at this, look at that. Things that I had already jumped ship because I needed professionally to do something. I switched to Apple mid-90 or whatever. But I was still connected to Atari and enjoying it a little bit while I still had my gear. And I was still reading about it even though when I gave all my Atari stuff away. And so I'm reliving my time with Atari from 1980, basically when I purchased my Atari 800, all the way up to mid 90s, and then going with the ST, Mega ST, and I started reliving through this magazine all the fun of the time. Versions of software that I never updated to because I had kind of, for lack of a better word, jumped ship already. I gave my Ataris away, but I was still reading about it and still, oh yeah, Atari was great, but I've moved on to Apple. And then, so now, flash to 2023, is it? I'm a Sinclair guy. I love Sinclair. I've been, now, really following it pretty well for, 5 years now, 2017, 2018. And I know enough about it to get in trouble. You guys have a story that I didn't feel from the 80s. So Sinclair was no failure. Good Lord, they sold 5 million Sinclair Speccies, right? But they didn't get past, in terms of the original ownership, 86. I guess Sir Clive sold Sinclair to Sugar Plum Fairy. What's his name? Alan Sugar. See how I do phonics? I use and remember the word sugar, and then Sugar Plum Fairy, Alan Sugar. That's how I got to it. So anyway, they did buy and acquire Sinclair. So I've been reading about this stuff and go, wow, what turbulence you guys went through. A lot shorter lifespan in terms of the company, because Atari, when the Tramiels took over Atari, they had it from 84 to basically 97 when they sold it to Hasbro. And of course, Atari before that was the biggest gaming company in the world from 77 or earlier with the coin-op stuff to when they sold it to Time Warner and all that, and then Warner sold the Tramiels. Atari was huge, and then they lost it all. So I went through that turbulence of, my God, the Atari was it, and I loved Atari, and they didn't do things well eventually, because they're not a failure, but they did lose out to the Nintendos and the Segas and everything else. Long time period, though, of Atari, and even though they tick today, not in the same vein as past years, but they're still technically alive, I guess, where the Amiga world, oh good Lord, there's 50,000 owners of the different Amiga patents and all that crap. That's why I don't like Amiga anymore, because it's so screwy and all the legal stuff that's behind it. I own this part and I own this part. Who the hell owns this part? I don't know who owns it. Papa Cheesemo, I don't know. Somebody owns it, but they can't all get together and make it right. So Amiga's still around, but not in the way that it was before. So let's go back and bring this all back to Crash Radio, because in Sinclair. So from the late 70s, obviously you guys were following Sir Clive. He wasn't Sir Clive yet, but I'm going to just keep saying Sir Clive. And then, of course, the ZX80 came out in the 81 and the Speccy and all these things. You guys had a good 5-6 years of excitement over the computer revolution over where you were. And all that, all of a sudden 86 hits and bam! The company was sold to a competitor. And that competitor then carried it on until they sold Olivetti or whatever it was. But that was kind of like a quick arousal. Woo! 5 years, 6 years, and then all of a sudden, whack! You got whacked in the head. And then all of a sudden, Sinclair was kind of no longer, at least in the memory that you had it. So what did they do wrong? They did a lot of things right. I mean, they sold quadrillions of computers, but ultimately they failed someplace along the way. So if you're listening to the radio right now, of course there's Crash Radio Facebook group. If you're on that, and go to the link that's talking about this particular radio chat, post down below what your thoughts are about why this could be opening up a rabbit hole you don't want to go down, but what made them ultimately, I'm not going to say fail, because they didn't fail. They did some wonderful things, but ultimately they didn't continue on. I'll say it nicely. There is not a Sinclair company today making computers anymore. There is, of course, the Speccy Next, which was nice enough for the current owners of the Sinclair IP or whatever, saying you can use it as long as it's not for profit, blah blah blah. We do have a cool new Speccy, but the old company of old, they never really got past that QL, right? So I'm going to put my 2 cents into this. So the crash of the early 80s in gaming happened. We all know that happened. The Sinclair, for lack of, per Sir Clive, jet-secking fricking Willie, he was thinking more businessy. So they came out with the QL. The QL was a bit hamstringed. Cool idea. 68, 008 processor, but it wasn't quite up to snuff with some of the other processors, and they just never latched on to the business world in big numbers. They sold, what, 200 and some odd thousand QLs? But they sold 5 million Speccies, and Speccy was a big game machine. It was a game machine. So maybe the gaming downfall did affect them to some degree, because the Speccy was a wonderful gaming system. And then, of course, Atari, we know the story there, kind of. And then, but, you know, other gaming companies did survive and did pick up from the ashes. The Nintendo kicked ass, Sega kicked ass, the Xboxes and all the G-string boxes, you name it. All these things eventually kicked ass. So they did continue on with that, but the Sinclair didn't. The Sinclair has been kept alive by people like me, people like you, and if you're watching the radio, I'm pointing in my video towards the camera, keeping it alive. Speccy Next, people that loved it, made the Speccy Next happen. Other people that have made boards that emulate or become a Speccy. All sorts of things have happened over the last number of decades to keep it alive. But in real honesty, the Sinclair as a computer company, you know, from what we're going to say 1980 to 1986, that 5-6 year span is where they kicked butt. And then all of a sudden, that butt was no longer being kicked. I think the gaming industry fall did help because the Speccy was a big gaming machine, helped the downfall of it. And then I'm sure there's bad business practices. As any time a company fails, there's some business practices that weren't done very well, probably, and that was part of the downfall. Competition. Sinclair sure had a lot of competition over there. The BBCs and the Acorns and all these other things that happened over there. Amstrad. Amstrad who purchased Sinclair. So they had some competition pickup. So maybe they weren't good about competing with these other companies. All of them stayed 8-bit though, right? The Amstrad, did they ever get to 16-bit? I don't think so. If they did it, maybe in a gaming thing or something. I don't follow Amstrad, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now. BBC, or the owners of Acorn, did eventually, I think, go 16-bit, right? The RISC OS and all that stuff. That's not one that I follow, but they did perpetuate and keep going. And now, of course, every device, you know, has an ARM processor. Now, I don't know if original owners of that still are involved in any way, and they're reaping the benefits of what they made back then. But in terms of a computer company that we all fell in love with back then, you know, you Sinclair folks basically had a good 5-year run, and then the carpet was pulled out from underneath you. What did you do when that happened? Did you switch to Amstrad? Did you switch to BBC? Did you go to Apple? Did you go to the IBMs? Who knows? What did you actually do? I'm just curious. I did jump ship from Atari, which I was a faithful from 1980 when I purchased my Atari 800, and that lasted me for a long time. Then I went to the Mega 2 ST about 7 years later in the late 80s, and then I did that all the way up into mid-90s when I went to Apple. I continue using Apple today, but I also use Linux. This computer right here is a 2014 Main Gear that I run Linux on. I don't have the heart to run Windows. It came with Windows, and I took it off and put Linux on there, and I run Ubuntu. Just, you know, scary enough with Linux to not know what the hell I'm doing, but it's pretty user-friendly these days, so I can get by. But I prefer my old Atari. I prefer playing games on my Speccy. I came to the Speccy late in life, but I'm glad I have, because now I've fallen in love with it. But I got to read the story of your 5 bitchin' ass years, and then all of a sudden, shit hit the fan, and Sinclair's no longer. Too bad, because, you know, what could have been? The QL, you know, if they would have went with a 68,000 instead of a 68008, and if they would have made the user interface, everybody uses mouses. I know some of you code heads love command line and shit, but the majority of people in this world, you want to either be Star Trek and say, computer, do this, or use a mouse and keyboard. Mouse to navigate a graphic-oriented screen, and click and clank. Most people don't want to try to remember, you know, things that you have to code in. Sure, command line can be cool, but come on, the majority of people, this is not Star Trek with Spock. Well, I guess it kind of is. the majority rules, damn it. And at this point, the Sinclair didn't have a wonderful, easy to use graphic. They had a little bit of a graphic candy on the QL, but it seems like it was a little tricky to get going. It took a long time to get going, and it never was an Apple, Mac, Apple II GS, a Commodore GOS, an Atari GEM. Even GEM being limited was still far superior in terms of viewability to a Commodore, like a desktop, a desk with keyboard and a stapler and things that you would think, okay, it's logical, I click this and it does that. QL, I don't really see ever had that easy to use. Maybe if they did and used the 68,000 originally and then went up to the 68030 like everybody else, like the Atari even did, the Falcon, the TT, they used 68030. Everybody else in the world went there, including Apple. If Sinclair had a chance, would have they taken that QL and bounced it up to a 6830, or would have they shinsed out and went a 68 816? That's actually a valid one. Apple went that direction with an 8, the 2GS. It's actually a 16-bit computer. I didn't know that for a long time, but now I do. But they would have did something else. They would have went 68, 815. No one knows about it, and it's because it's not, I don't think, a real chip. But they would have did something a little bit different. You got to get the right chip in there, and a fun, easy-to-use, graphic-oriented desktop. Maybe you would have grabbed some more business people over there to keep the longevity of Sinclair a little bit longer. You didn't. You never had a chance. I think Amstrad basically pulled the QL plug. So maybe you never had that opportunity, but did have visions, Sir Clive, of doing that later on. And you would have taken over the business world of the UK and all your places over there. That obviously never happened. Sinclair was sold. Amstrad took ownership of it. Then Olivetti got it, I think. Sir Alan Sugar Plum. He's a sir too now. I shouldn't say sir, because he's probably going to send somebody over now. What's it? Alan Sugar. I don't know why I think Sugar Plum Fairy in my head, but that's how I associate things. He seems to be a cool dude, but he was kind of like Jack Tramiel. Business is war. That was his thing, right? A little different than Sir Clive, a little different than Steve Jobs, more artsy, type of guy, different than Gates. They all had their own interesting personalities, right? Anyway, I appreciate Alan Sugar. He kept Sinclair going, with the +2 and the +3 for a little while, and then eventually that all fell apart too, and time marches on. This radio spot ends up being longer than I expected, so I don't know when this will come on. I think maybe next week. Anyway, what's your thoughts? So if you end up watching the video part of this the Saturday after the radio spot airs, do post down below. What's your thoughts? If Sir Clive kept Sinclair, had a chance to make the QL a little more robust, a little bit more user-friendly, get rid of the micro cassettes or micro carts, and replaced it with not a 3-inch floppy, move on to 3.5-inch floppy. The rest of the world went that direction, but Amstrad had a 3-inch floppy. They didn't stick with or go to things that became more common. There's a bazillion. I've got 3.5-inch floppies all around here. And I'm pretty sure over in UK you probably had that as a pretty common thing too for a long time, right? I don't know. Anyway, if you moved on to that, maybe you could have milked the Sinclair Speccy line a little bit longer. Like an Apple. Apple kept the 8-bit going for a while, but then they went to GS, which was a 16-bit machine, and it had a graphic-oriented desktop, and it was moving in the direction, and it was at the same time as the Mac, a 16-bit processor, but the Mac did things a little bit differently. Eventually kicked ass, and now Apple's the biggest company in the world, but Mac did not sell great off the shoot, and they had their problems too. But I would be curious to know how Sinclair would have fared if they would have kept ownership. Would it have gotten worse, or would they have actually latched on somehow and became another 5 million seller with some Sinclair QLX that was 68040 and kicked butt? I don't know. But anyway, thanks for listening to this radio cast. Have a great rest of your week. Bye. And I'm waving at the camera saying bye to those watching the video. Bye-bye.